Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So in today's tutorial we're going to continue with our introduction to game development using Python's library Pygame. So if you're anyone who is new to computer programming, or you know the basics of programming and you want to build a simple project around a game or playing a video game using Python, then this tutorial is for you. So in this tutorial we're going to go ahead and build a simple space invader game. So we've already started we have covered already 3 tutorials, so this is the 4th tutorial. And this tutorial we're going to go ahead and deal with the player movement and how to move the player around and how to move the player based on different buttons that the user presses. Okay, that's what we're going to be implementing in this video specifically. So what I want us to go ahead and look like, again, if you're not if you're new to the channel and you haven't yet subscribed the community, kindly consider joining the community and subscribing to the YouTube channel. I create videos on Python, data science, web development, building back-end applications, APIs and stuff like that. So if you're interested in those things, kindly consider subscribing. Okay, thank you for that. And enough of the long introduction, so we can just go ahead and actually look at what we're trying to do. So we're going to be looking at how to move the player around. So when I press the left arrow key, the player should move to the left of the screen. When I press the right arrow key, the player should move to the right of the screen, right? So right now we have this kind of setup where our player image is just being static and doesn't respond to anything, right? So I want us to go ahead and add some functionality to be able to move the player around. So you can see this simple diagram. If you move to the right, then you need to increase the X value. If you move to the left, then you need to decrease the X value, right? So we're not going to you can even incorporate the concept of moving forward or backwards, but in this tutorial I'm not going to go ahead and do that. I'm only going to cover moving to the left or to the right. But once you learn how to move to the left or to the right, then you can also move to the up or down. Okay, so again, remember how this screen works, right? The gaming screen. So up here is 0 0, and then going to the right is increases, okay, and then going to the bottom where the y increases instead of decreasing, like a normal standard x and y axis, okay, coordinates. So in this case we have so for us to be able, when you press the right arrow key, we want to increment the x value for the the player's position, and if you press the left arrow key, you want to decrement the x values for the y position. So that's what you're going to go ahead and do, and let's go ahead and jump in. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm in the folder that we are using, so I'm just going to go ahead and open up my VS Code. Feel free to use any editor that you're comfortable using. I'm just going to go ahead and use VS Code. Okay, so once I have that done, I'm just going to close that. So once I have this done, what I want to go ahead and do is implement the player movements. Okay, so how do we go ahead and implement the player movement? So I told you about game events. We started game events in the previous tutorial. So if you haven't watched those tutorials, kindly go ahead and check about game events. And game events, I'll just keep it in short again. Game events are just any actions that take place within the window of our game. So whenever you are within the window of our game and you press the right arrow key, that's a game event. Whenever you press the left arrow key, that's a game event. Whenever you press space, that's a game event, right? So in the last tutorial, we use the game event to be able to quit, right, when a person clicks on the X close button right here, or the person to be able to quit when you press the escape button. So this is what we're going to implement. This is what we implemented in the last tutorials. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and implement more game events, and for this game events you're going to be checking for the arrow presses. Like if a person presses the up arrow key, or the left arrow key or the right arrow key, you want to grab those actions and then do something with those. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go in here checking for if any key has been pressed, right? So now you want to check if the left key has been pressed. So I'm going to say if sorry, let me get that right. So if game event dot key equals to, right, pygame, sorry, my bad, let me just fix that typo. So pygame dot this is going to be key the left key, right? So the left key underscore left, just like that. So if the left key has been pressed, what you want to do is simply go ahead and simply going to go ahead and change the player's position, right? Change the player's position. For now, I'm just going to keep pass here. So we need to go ahead and change the player's position. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to create a variable called I'm going to simply call it change in X position. So we say change underscore in underscore X underscore position. So change in X position, and by default is going to be 0. So what you want to go ahead and do is I want to go down here and I want to say if the left arrow key has been pressed, what you want to do, let me just go back to the presentation. So if the left key has been pressed, you want to decrement this value because you want the player's X value to decrease, right, to move closer to the left part of the screen. So what you want to go ahead and do is I'm just going to go ahead and delete this, and I'm going to go ahead and simply say change change in x position, and you're going to go ahead and do this, and you're going to simply use you're going to say equals to, and you're going to minus use a negative sign because you want it to minus, so you're going to use negative 0. Let's say negative 0.7. So you want to move the player to the left by negative 0.7, right? Okay, good. So once this is going to handle the left key. Now what about, sorry, the left arrow key? Now what about the right arrow key? So I'm going to say if I'm going to say if game event, right, just like we did. So if game event dot key is going to be equals to pygame dot key underscore right. So you're going to check if the right key has been pressed, and if the right key has been pressed, you want to go ahead and do, you're going to say change in x position, and you're going to simply say equals to we're going to now use 0.7. we're going to assign 0.7 to our x position. So how do we go ahead and increment or decrement this value? So the first thing we want to go ahead and do before we decrement or apply this value to the actual player's position, what I want to go ahead and do is to, first of all, I'm going to go ahead and change the player's position. So we're going to check if the key has been released, and if the key has been released, then you're going to apply either this value or this value, meaning that whenever you press the right arrow key, right, so we want you to release the right arrow key first before we add 0.7 to the x position of the player. So that's what you want to go ahead and do, and the same concept applies to the when pressing the left arrow key. So we're going to go ahead and simply say, when we say check this is a check for keystroke, let's say keystroke release or something, yeah. So check for keystroke release, and then what you want to go ahead and do, you're going to say if game event equals to pygame dot key up. So we're going to check if key up. We're not going to check key down because previously we were checking key down. So here we're going to go ahead and check key up. So make sure that the if statement is, this if statement is not within this if statement, because this we're checking the key down, and here we're checking if the key has been released. Okay, so if the key has been released, what you want to go ahead and you're going to check if game event dot key, right, equals to pygame. We're going to check which key has been released. So if equals to pygame dot dot left key, we're going to check if either the left key underscore left, or we're going to check if game event dot key equals to right pygame dot key is going to be the right key. We're going to check if the right or the left key has been released. What you want to go ahead and do, we're going to say change in position. You're going to simply assign it back to 0. So as long as the key is being pressed, you're going to continuously move the player. Once the key has been released, you're going to simply say change in the x position. You're going to now give it to 0. Means you don't want to move the player anymore because the key which has been pressed has been now released. Okay, so here if any person presses the key, you're going to apply these values, and if a person releases the key, you're going to set that back to 0 so that you don't move the player anymore. Okay, good. So once we have that done, what you simply want to go ahead and do is now go ahead and simply apply these values to the player itself. So if you go up here, you can see we have the player X and the player Y. So I want to apply these values to it because these values are the one which controls the player's X position and the player's Y position. Because you can see we are updating this image using this X and Y value on our coordinate system, and I explained all this in the last tutorial. So if you haven't checked out, you can go ahead and check that out. So what I want to go ahead and do here, I'm going to go ahead and simply say what I'm going to say, add. That's what I want to do. So what I want to go ahead and do is simply say, you're going to simply say change in the player's position. So we're going to go ahead and simply change in the player's position. So this should be called after the screen fill. Okay, so this should be called after the screen fill, so that the player can appear above the drawing rather than below the drawing, because here you are filling it with a color, right? So these colors come in different layers. So if you apply the movement before, then the player won't show above the background, so the player will show below the background. So I want to apply the movement after the background so that it can show up on top. So what I'm going to go ahead and simply do in here, I'm just going to go ahead and change the values right here. That's why that's the reason why we need to display the player here. Okay, so if you move this blade skin up here above this fill, then the player will be below, so you can even move it up and then try that out. But that's why we need to put these values right here. That's something I did explain to you in the last tutorial. Okay, so so this one will make sure that the player there is a background fill, and now the player is on top of the background. That's another way you can think of it, right? Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and now apply the player movement. So change in the X and change in the Y. So what I'm going to go ahead and simply do is we need to go ahead and simply say the player, and then we're going to change the value. So I'm going to go down here, and then let me just keep the player's functionality below this bleed screen part. So I'm going to simply say player x, right, you're going to get the x value. So player x, right, you're going to say player x equals to be plus equals to change in the yx the x position. So the player's current yx value is going to be plus or minus the value depending on whether the person press the left arrow key or the right arrow key. Once we do that, you're going to now blitz the player again. So good. So once we have this, now we can see that we're not applying this value anymore to the point where the player is being blitzed. So now we can go ahead and simply pass in here. We want to say player x, and then you're going to say player so I'm getting player y here, just like that. So now I need to go down here and simply pass in those values. So I'm going to say player, because we want those values to change, for player x, and then you're also going to say player y did not change, so it will just be the same player player y value that we set above here, okay, right here. Because we want the player to not be able to move up and down, you just want it to remain on the y axis. The coordinate should be the same and not change. So what that should be done. So let me just save this and let me just go ahead, let me just close this up. So I'm going to go ahead, go into my terminal, and then simply let me just go ahead and simply say Python 3, and then need to activate my virtual environment. So I'm going to say source. So make sure that you have your virtual environment activated, /bin/activate, and this is only going to work for this command. And I explained to you how this command is only going to work for Linux, right, and MacBook. So if you're on Windows, the command to activate your virtual environment is different. So you can check the previous tutorial where we went over this, okay. So once I have that, I can do Python 3 and then main.py, and then simply run the file. So once it's running, so let me just go ahead and press the key. Now you can see our player is moving around, right? So our player is moving all fine. So now you can see right now it's moving around, but you can see it moving out of the screen, and when I'm not even pressing it, it continues, the player continuously move even though I'm not pressing the key, okay. So now let's go ahead and actually solve this. So make sure that this key, make sure that I got the code here right. So okay, so we have this if statement to check if the key has been down, and we check which key has been down, and we do coordinate based on those. When there's left key, we minus; when there's right key, we add. We simply add, right. And then we're going to check if the key has been released, and if the key has been released, key up, then what we're going to do, we're going to check if game.key equals to left key or game.key equals to the right key. And if that's the case, you're going to simply say the change in position back to 0. But that does not seem to be happening, because if I go ahead and run the game again, so if I run it again and I press right, I just press it once, but it continuously moves. Okay, so that's an issue that we have right now. So it's probably in our code and our implementation. So let's go ahead and solve that issue. Okay guys, so now I look at the code closely, and I spot we made a mistake, very simple mistake that we made. So you can see right here, you have to check the key type, if it's a key down or key up. So I just say game event dot equals, so that's why it was never even working in the first place. You have to simply say type, right. So you need to check if the game event type is a key down or a key down type. So that's my error. So I have to make sure that here it is type. Okay, once I have that, let me just run the code again, and now we shouldn't have that error. So now it should work. So if I press right, it goes up and down. So once I made an error right there, and I didn't check the type of the key. I was just checking if the game event itself, which I was checking the game event type, whether it was an up a key up or a key down event type. Okay, so once we have this done, now our game works perfectly. So now our player has movement, so you can see we can move all the way. Okay, so our player can move all the way, but one thing you can notice is that we can move out of the screen. So how do we make sure the player doesn't move out of the screen? Because we don't want the player moving out of the screen, right? So you can see right now he's moving out of the screen. So how do we prevent this from happening? So let's go ahead and let me just show you how we can prevent this from happening. Okay, so we need to set boundaries for this. So it means that we don't want the player to go, let me just go back to my diagrams, and then let me just show you. We don't want the player to exceed about 900 and 900 of x, and then also 0 of x. So we want to limit that the player between those boundaries. So let's go ahead and actually go ahead and set those boundaries, and I'm going to do that I'm going to do that above this. Okay, so don't do this, don't do the code that I'm going to write, don't write it above. Make sure that you write it above this line, don't write it below this line. Okay, so always make sure that you have that code above that line. Okay, and I have a semicolon right here. Let me just delete it. In Python we don't use a semicolon, so I'm going to go here and say add some boundaries. Okay, so some boundaries, just like that. And what you're going to do, I'm going to say if player x, right, if player x is less or equals to 0, right, what you're going to do means that the player cannot go above the 0 coordinate. So if I go back here, the player cannot go beyond here. That's what we're going to check. Okay, So we're going to check if the player is less or equals to 0. What we're going to do, we're going to say player, we're going to reset the player's position back to 0. Okay, so player X will be equals to 0. So whenever a person is trying to go outside of the screen, and then whenever it reaches 0, you're going to set it back to whenever it tries to go above the screen. Whenever it reaches 0.0, means that the player moves until 0.0. You're going to reset it back to 0.0 to prevent it from getting out of the screen. That's what we are trying to implement right here. And you're going to go ahead and simply check again. You're going to check. You're going to say else if. You're going to use an else if let me get that right. So if player X, we're going to check the player X value. Its value is greater or equals to. Now let me just go back and explain to you here. So we don't want the player to go above certain points right here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and actually say just 900. Let's check if the player the player's X position is greater than 900, right? So that should prevent the player from going out of our screen, right? So now just go back in here and we say just say player X, right? Player X, and the player X value should set it back to, let's say, 900. Okay, so if the player tries to go above 900, we set it back to 900 to prevent the player from going above the screen. This happens so fast that our eyes won't realize they're setting back to the 900 or the 0 coordinates for the x-axis. Okay, so once I have this done, let me just go back ahead and let me run the code one more time and then run the code. So now you can see, you can go here. So now you can see I can't go above out of the screen to the left. Now let's try to the right one and let's see what happens. So yeah, the right, we will go above the right skin, so you can see clearly goes above it. So what do we need to do to make sure that this works? So I'm just exit out. Let's go back to the code and let me explain to you right here. So we're checking if the player's X value, right, is greater or less than 900. And if that's the case, we're setting it back to 900. But for now, if you try to do that, that doesn't work for us. The reason why this does not work for us is because we're not considering the size of that player's image itself. So what we need to do, go ahead and do, let me just reduce this number to about 800 and let's see the effects of that. Let me just change this number to about 800 and let's see how it goes about. So make sure we have to factor in the size of the image. So remember that whenever I was telling about the player's image, so if I bring it right here, this is the player's image. It's a 64 pixel image, 64 by 64 pixel image. So we have to make sure we subtract that 64 from the other end of the screen to prevent the player from going all the way above the screen, because if you just use 900, then that won't work. Just to demonstrate this to you, I'm just going to go into my terminal and then run the code again. So if I run the code and now let me go to the left and let's see what happens. So you can see now it doesn't go above, right? So we need to subtract the player's X values, the player's sizes from when you're talking about the Y, but when you're talking about the x-axis going to the right. But if you're going to the left, then that it isn't an issue for us. But if we are talking about moving towards the right direction, then that's an issue for us. We have to consider the size of the image. So right now you can see I cannot move above it, but you can see we still have some space. Let me just bring this as you can see. You can see clearly. So you can see we still have some spaces right here. So how do we go ahead solving this issue? So the easiest way is to just simply do the math and then find this value. So right now our image is a 64 pixel image, right? So if we just go ahead and do 900 minus around 64, we should now get a given value, right, which will be 836. So if I do it, will be 836 pixel image. So 836, so means that the player should not go above 836 in the in the x direction towards the right side of the screen. So now we should go ahead and change this to be 836. Okay, and then change this back to be 836. So this will always make sure that the player does not go out of the screen. Okay, and this might be a bit difficult to understand, especially when you're starting out. So just take some time, look at this graph, and simply take a pen and a paper and try to do the calculations, and it will make clear sense to you. Basically, this is a 64 pixel image, so we have to take this minus that 64 to make sure that the end point of the screen in which the player can go to and not above it. So if you just use 900, then the player will be able to go outside of the screen, as we have seen earlier on. Okay, so once we have that explanation out of the way, let's run the code again and hopefully let's see how it works. So let's go ahead all the way to the right. Now you can see we are just at the right edge of the screen, and you can also move all the way to the left, and you're just at the left edge of the screen. So all that works as expected. So you can apply the same concept of moving left and right to moving up and down if you want, or you can just apply it for practice. So that's basically what I wanted us to cover in this section. So in the next section, we're going to go ahead and simply go and learn how to add different enemies to the screen, because right now we have our player being able to move around. Now we're going to go ahead and add enemies to the screen, and then later on we'll be able to shoot down these enemies and then get scores and all that. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing in the next tutorial. So guys, thanks for watching. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, please kindly consider subscribing, liking this video, and sharing the content with anyone who you think might find it helpful. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one. Keep safe.